Bank Secrecy Act has nothing to do with keeping your data and transactions secret. In fact, it should be called the Bank Snooping Act because that's what it is. And I'm going to tell you about it in my very first episode of PSL, Privacy, Security, and Liberty.
Hey folks, it's your friend John Rich. This is Mike Ring here. We heard too many stories about people getting canceled by their bank.
Does Old Glory Bank have a mission statement? Yet. It's called the Constitution.
The difference is you won't be canceled for who you are, and what you believe.
People need to have an institution that they can trust in.
Well, I like to say that I'm standing between the regulators and America, and I'm the only bank executive who is not intimidated by the regulators.
DEI, there's PSL, Privacy, Security, Liberty.
That's it.
Privacy, security, and liberty.
Today's episode is about protecting your privacy by talking about the Bank Secrecy Act. So the Bank Secrecy Act is an important law that impacts you, but has nothing to do with keeping your data and transactions secret. Of course, a law that actually kept your bank transactions secret, now that would be a great law, but that's not the Bank Secrecy Act. To the contrary, the Bank Secrecy Act requires banks to snoop on all of your financial transactions and tell the government about certain ones. I made this point a few weeks ago when I was testifying in front of the Senate about debanking. Senator Jack Reed, a Democrat from Rhode Island, asked me about the laws to prevent money laundering, and this is what I said.
And one of the aspects of crypto, it's a rather new phenomenon, is that it seems to be a very often used vehicle for financing of places like North Korea, financing of illicit activities. Does that put more pressure on you?
I believe the Bank Secrecy Act, which is what you're talking about for AML, and by the way, for folks not in this room, the Bank Secrecy Act has nothing to do with the secrets and has nothing to do with your customer data. It is strictly about money laundering and those rules what you're talking about. I am not in favor of the amount of delegation law enforcement has done on banks with respect to these type of issues. They're real issues, but banks should not be on the front lines because what happens is that is the Trojan horse for banks to do whatever they want. Oh, it's AML, BSA issues, or the regulators to come in and say, you can't do crypto because of that. If you're checking out at a grocery store, does the cashier and the bagger have to let the police know you bought some chemicals? Of course not. And so I believe it's the Trojan horse. It should be a small component of the issues you're worried about with crypto.
Although we were there to talk about debanking, I used the opportunity to take a shot at the Bank Secrecy Act because folks aren't talking about it. Now, the Bank Secrecy Act, or the Bank Snooping Act, as I like to call it, is just another example of Congress mislabeling a law to mislead the public. You all remember Joe Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, which everyone knew was really about pork spending for green energy. Finally, Joe Biden admitted it, and here is that clip.
My investments, through my investments, the most significant climate change law ever. And by the way, it is a $369 billion bill. It's called we should have named it what it was, but at any rate.
Watching that just never gets old. Thank goodness we are no longer there. So what is the Bank Secrecy Act, or as I call it, the Bank Snooping Act? I predict I'm the first banker who's really talked about the Bank Secrecy Act because most bankers don't care about PSL, privacy, security, and liberty. And if they do, they're afraid to push back against the government. Not me. I'm a troublemaker, and I'm here to tell you what actually happens behind the scenes because of the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act. Bank personnel and AI snoop on every transaction you do. Every wire, ACH, debit card spend, check, deposit, withdrawal. They're snooping on you, and you need to know about it and how they do it. So the Bank Secrecy Act goes back to 1970. Signed by Richard Nixon. And back then, the law was actually not ridiculous. It mostly went unnoticed. It was really primarily about currency transaction reports. You know, how banks have to file reports each transaction over $10,000. While many people could say that is inappropriate, it's not really the business of the government, how you spend your money. That's really where it started and stopped until 9/11. And then the BSA hit the government overreach lottery with the passage of the Patriot Act, but as so too often happens with Congress, they swing the pendulum too far because of an event. And for all the good intent intended by the Patriot Act, we have seen it repeatedly abused. The Patriot Act amended the Bank Secrecy Act, or the Bank Snooping Act, by requiring these additional obligations by banks. Banks must do full KYC, know your customer, as part of their customer identification program. I'm actually okay with this part of the law, and we would do this even if we weren't required by law, because like all banks, we are in a constant battle to stop fraudsters. So we do want to know, especially as a digital first bank, where we don't get to have the privilege of meeting most of our customers in person, we do need to have good KYC. But unfortunately, it goes much further. And the BSA now requires banks to have enhanced monitoring, and enhanced monitoring means blanket monitoring, to stop criminal activity. That is the snooping part of the BSA, and is the part for which I'm here talking to you about today, because if the government did what banks are required to do under law, it would clearly violate the Fourth Amendment, and I'll explain that. So as we all know, the Fourth Amendment prevents unreasonable searches and seizures, but this is about searches. And as a reminder, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, protects you from the government, not from private industry. So the Fourth Amendment restricts government, law enforcement, from unreasonably searching your financial transactions. But Congress wanted a way around this. They wanted to actually snoop on all of your financial transactions, and they couldn't do it. So they put it in the Patriot Act, and now they require banks since 2001 to do this snooping for government and be on the front lines to stop criminal activity. In essence, banks are legally obligated to violate the Fourth Amendment every time you do a financial transaction. So how do banks snoop on you, and what does the Bank Secrecy Act, the Bank Snooping Act, really entail? Now, you saw from my video clip with Senator Reid, a lot of it goes down to money laundering, and it's the anti-money laundering rules of the Bank Secrecy Act that really are the Trojan horse. It's the rules that require banks to snoop on you under the spirit of anti-money laundering, but goes much deeper, as we'll talk about. So what these rules require banks to do, and certain other companies such as casinos, money service businesses, art dealers, real estate agencies, crypto companies, pawnbrokers, they need to monitor, snoop on every transaction, determine if your transaction is suspicious. And if someone working at the bank thinks it is suspicious, and that's the big question, what is suspicious and what is a criminal activity? Then the bank is required to file a suspicious activity report, a SAR, and provide it to the government that contains your private data. Now, we'll talk more about SARs in a minute, but I want you to really understand what is happening in America and the excess snooping done on you by banks. And this is why you get calls by your bank. So what's that wire for? What was the purpose of this transaction? Tell me about that check. They're actually required to do it, and it's not appropriate. Every transaction is being scrutinized by software and people who are not in law enforcement. And it's like I said in that clip with Senator Reid, the amount of delegation that government has done on banks to snoop on you is inappropriate, and the unintended consequences are bad. And what's really crazy is that banks have to do this, but other companies don't. So are car companies required to report traffic violations? Why not? They could. I drive a Tesla. It records everything. It has my data. A Tesla could literally send to law enforcement every time I had a traffic violation. How about Amazon, who owns Alexa and the Ring camera? Are they required to report rape and domestic abuse? Why not? They could. They're always monitoring you. Apple Siri. If you have an iPhone, you know it's always listening, old Siri. Apple could clearly report crimes to police. How about Hertz and Avis and rental cars? Do they have to call government every time a suspicious person rents a vehicle if they suspect a crime? Why not? How about a hotel and a grocery store? What if they see something? Are they supposed to call? Of course not. The burden is on the banks. They're literally requiring us to spy on you, the Americans. Now, granted, in the old days in 1970 when this was first passed, and then even in 2001 when it was updated by the Patriot Act that required this new enhanced, I call it blanket snooping, enhanced monitoring, it wasn't such a big deal because they did not have the technology they do today. So it was literally humans doing the monitoring, likely mostly in a branch, because there really wasn't the online banking that there is today. But it's way different now. Really powerful AI tools looking at everything you do. And I don't know about other banks, but because we at Old Glory Bank believe in PSL, we keep our AI solution closed loop so that it can never be reviewed by a third party, even the vendor, or given to the government. One of the things I always worry about at Old Glory Bank is how can government go around me and our other passionate leaders and spy on you? So when we selected a monitoring tool for BSA, we ensured that the vendor did not have access to our customers' data. I'm not sure if all banks do that, but certainly we do it at Old Glory Bank. So, under the Bank Snooping Act, banks are legally obligated to snoop on your private financial transactions and report suspicious activities to the government. In this case, FinCEN, which is a law enforcement arm of Treasury. Now, there are two obvious questions with this requirement. First is, what is the definition of suspicious? What it means to you may mean something to someone else. It's basically any transaction or a series of transactions that a bank suspects involves criminal activity. I know it's very broad. And that obviously leads to the second question, which is who gets to make that decision? That's the problem. Bank employees make the decision as to what's a criminal activity, what's suspicious. Now, granted, maybe their AI serves up the transactions, but still humans have to make that ultimate decision and submit that suspicious activity report, that form, to the government. This is the problem, folks. Do you want the people working at Chase, one of the worst offenders against conservatives, Bank of America, who is anything but the Bank for America and frequently debanks people they disagree with, Capital One, who you know Trump just sued for debanking, USAA, who debanked President Trump's former lawyer, John Eastman, Wells Fargo, the other big banks? Do you want those woke banks who hate folks like us who fly the flag and believe in God, country, and family to decide if your activity is criminal? Do you want those people with their preferred pronouns who think we are racist and threats to democracy because we love America? You want those people who hate you because we don't want our taxes going to hard left causes like the people who hate you because we don't want our taxes going to hard left causes as Doge has discovered? You want these people snooping on every transaction you do? So listen, PSL, this podcast, is not intended to be a commercial for Old Glory Bank. It just happens to be that Old Glory Bank is the forefather of privacy, security, and liberty. So I got to state the obvious. Since we launched Old Glory Bank in April of 2023, right about 2 years ago, if you remember back in 2023, it is not like today. It was the dark days of America, and they were truly shutting down us patriots and conservatives. And back then, we have been shouting from the beginning about being a pro-America bank that won't debank you and won't improperly share your data with the government. Granted, lots of people we're now seeing are getting on the pro-America train. But back in 2023, Old Glory Bank was one of the few companies saying no to DEI, no to ESG, and no to social credit scores. Only Old Glory Bank was preaching PSL, privacy, security, and liberty. So who do you want to trust with your financial privacy? Employees working at those big woke banks or Old Glory Bank? Never forget who was involved in Old Glory Bank. John Rich, Dr. Ben Carson, Larry Elder, Bill Shine, the former co-president of Fox News, Governor Mary Fallin, great state Oklahoma. Opening an account in Old Glory Bank, it only takes 8 minutes. All right, that commercial's over. Back to talking about the Bank Secrecy Act. Once an employee at a bank suspects criminal activity, they have to fill out a report, which is known as a suspicious activity report, a SAR. Now, you probably remember SARs because they were a household name back in 2023 when the House Oversight Committee, led by James Comer, started publishing reports about the banks who filed more than 150 SARs, I understand, on Hunter and James Biden. So SARs became a household name. Everyone started thinking about them. By the way, while 150 might have gone to the Bidens, in 2023, banks filed more than 3.7 million SARs. That's almost 4 million transaction details that were given to the government in 2023 about your data. Now, you telling me there was 4 million crimes? Of course not. This is being abused, which is what the government wanted. They wanted banks to snoop on people's transactions. These reports include all of your personal information, including your driver's license or passport information and your social security number. Now, I'll go back to my earlier statement. Most industries are not required to snoop on their customers and file reports with the government. How did we get here that banks are legally required to perform the function of law enforcement and knowingly violate your Fourth Amendment by snooping on your financial activity? Folks, of course, I am not suggesting I support criminal activity, just the opposite. Old Glory Bank are the good guys. We are a law and order bank. I'm just saying banks shouldn't have to be legally obligated to violate your Fourth Amendment rights, the Bill of Rights, and spy on you. Old Glory Bank, we love law enforcement, so much so we're the only bank in the history of the world that has Old Glory Protect. And you know what that is? I hope. If not, let me tell you. If you're a protector, and that's a big group of folks, law enforcement, all law enforcement, state, local, and federal, military, all branches, Guard, Reserve, firefighters, including volunteer, and U.S. Border Patrol agents. If you are in that group of protector, law enforcement, military, firefighter, U.S. Border Patrol agent, and you bank at Old Glory Bank and set up direct deposit, God forbid you pay the ultimate sacrifice and die in the line of duty, We show up at your house and give your family $100,000, and it is free to you. So I don't want to hear any BS that we support criminal activity. We're just the opposite. We support law enforcement. We are a law and order bank. I am just against government overreach. I'm against spying on your activity for no reason when we suspect nothing, when no one suspects anything wrong that you've done, but yet we have to spy on you. So if you're a fraudster or a bad actor, do not think you can come to Old Glory Bank. We do the hard work 24/7 to stop fraudsters and criminals, not because of the Bank Snooping Act, but because it's good business. But that's a much different standard for us as a business wanting to keep out fraudsters and bad actors than what's required under the Bank Secrecy Act, the Bank Snooping Act, and that's why there's a problem. So let me take the other side of the argument. There's always two sides. Obviously, Congress intended good things by the Bank Secrecy Act. The problem with government is good intentions always have unintended consequences. So let's talk about who loves the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act. Big government loves BSA. The hard left loves BSA. But in a free society, the minimal benefit, in my view, that comes from the BSA, now estimates are that only 4% of the millions of SARs that are filed each year result in any type of criminal enforcement. Now, that's a pretty big disparity between the benefit and the burden. And the burden is the snooping that banks do on you, the filing of reports to the government about your transactions that respectfully the government has no business knowing for any other reason. And these reports are an infringement on your privacy. So if you think about since 2001, when this enhanced blanket snooping started because of the Patriot Act, I estimate that probably 50 million SARs have been filed. Where is that data? Who has that massive database? This is not how a free society is supposed to exist. This is not how a free society works. And even with all the snooping under the BSA, it's missing the big crimes. We know this. Did the BSA stop Bernie Madoff? Of course not. Did the BSA stop the FTX implosion? Of course not. Is all this snooping stopping the fentanyl crisis? Listen, the classic example of money laundering, which the BSA is intended to stop, is money laundering that happens from fentanyl, from drugs. Is it making a bit of difference? I'm certainly not hearing President Trump saying that, oh, thank goodness the fentanyl crisis is solved because of the BSA. No, he's putting tariffs on and doing other things to stop countries from bringing it in. The BSA is doing nothing to stop real problems. It's just another way that government can snoop on you. And last but not least, did the BSA stop Jeffrey Epstein? Clearly not. Chase Bank kept banking him through 2013. And with all their lawyers and compliance people at Chase, did it matter? Of course not. These overreaching laws never work. Chase has said that it did nothing wrong. It seemed to do something to settle for $290 million with the victims, and then for another $75 million with the Virgin Islands. But what's really worse than banks snooping on you, violating your Fourth Amendment, which the government cannot do directly, but makes banks do it, is that the regulators and woke banks use the BSA, the Bank Secrecy Act, or in my version, the Bank Snooping Act, to debank and cancel people they don't like. That's the real problem with the BSA. Take Chase Bank. I love beating on Chase Bank. They use the BSA as a reason to debank people. Now, Jamie Dimon admits this. Now, he doesn't think he admits it, but he does. First, he says there's no debanking by Chase. Now, I definitively know that's not correct because we have people who were debanked by Chase and then came to Old Glory Bank. But he says, no, that's a lie. They don't debank anyone. And then he says, well, if we do, it's because of the regulators and AML, anti-money laundering under the BSA. Check out his video.
On debanking, the president has accused you and Mr. Moynihan of debanking conservatives. What do you make of those allegations?
We don't debank people because of their political, religious affiliations.
What's your message?
But there are a lot of things that can be fixed, and we should fix them. The rules and the requirements are so onerous, and it does cause people to be debanked who, in my opinion, should not be debanked.
So do you blame the banking regulators primarily for this debanking issue?
Pretty much, yeah.
I'm sorry, but I'm calling BS on Jamie Dimon at Chase Bank and the other woke banks who blame the Bank Secrecy Act for debanking. It's not the Bank Secrecy Act. It's them. Old Glory Bank is subject to the same laws and regulations on AML, but we have never debanked someone who disagrees with us. How is it that these other banks can debank people and blame it on AML when I definitively know, not only as a lawyer, but the CEO of a bank, that the AML does not require you to debank people who disagree with you? It is a cover, and it's wrong. Thus, for the limited good folks in government and the hard left may think about the Bank Snooping Act, it's clearly offset by the data collection happening by government and by giving woke banks cover to debank people with whom they disagree. The regulators have recently done this. It's one of the things we talked about in the recent debanking hearing. Operation Choke Point 2.0, which was about crypto, about banks stopping crypto companies from having a bank account. There was no legal reason why banks could not provide banking services to legal crypto companies. But the Biden administration didn't want banks to provide services because they didn't like crypto. And they didn't like crypto because it gave Americans control over their own finances and gave them an alternative to the Federal Reserve. That's why they didn't like crypto. And so the way they try to choke out crypto, since there was no law preventing crypto, they try to choke them out, just like Obama did in 2013 with the 2A space. Biden tried to choke out crypto through the FDIC and the SEC. And with the FDIC, it was FIL 1622, released in April of 2022, that essentially stopped banks from providing services to crypto companies. Now, I knew that was improper when it was released, and I've always pushed back against it. We proudly bank crypto companies, legal crypto companies, and we provide on-off ramps to crypto companies. So before we wrap up my very first episode of PSL, I want to call out one element of the Bank Secrecy Act that actually was the one that started back in 1970, 71, I think it was. And that's the silliness of the currency transaction reports under the BSA. You know, banks have to file CTRs if you do a cash transaction of at least $10,000. What's so crazy about this, and 21 million of them, 21 million CTRs were filed in 2023. So you take 21 million CTRs, another almost 4 million SARs. Now that's 25 million transactions the government received last year on Americans that the government had no business monitoring. And now where that data is, what database it's in. But if you think the CTR is good policy, and I actually don't, government should at least acknowledge that it should have kept up with inflation. Now, if that $10,000 had been adjusted for inflation, today it would be $75,000. So listen, back in 1971, $10,000 was a lot of money. Still is, by the way. But it made sense that if someone was moving $10,000 around, maybe you should file a report. But inflation adjusted, that should be $75,000 today. And I think most people, including free American patriots like myself, would probably say, yeah, if $75,000, $80,000, $100,000 gets moved in cash, you probably should pay attention to that. But no one thinks it should be $10,000. That's ridiculous. And so what happens is people like I do just hate the fact that every time you do a transaction with around 10 grand, there's a report. And so what happens, and this is what I want to talk about, because this is a trap that government gets you. What happens is people are like, the heck with the government. I don't want them seeing my cash movement. I'm not doing anything illegal. What is it to the government about how I spend my hard-earned cash? So what they do is it's called structuring. They structure transactions innocently many times. Someone structures a transaction. They say, listen, I'm only going to pull out $9,000, or I'm only going to deposit $9,000. And what happens if you do that a few times, completely innocent, because you just don't want the government getting a report on you, even though you pay your taxes, do nothing wrong, that is going to be deemed very likely as structuring, and that itself is a crime. So think about this. The cashier depositing $9,500 or withdrawing $9,000, whatever it is, you do that a couple times. You think, oh, they don't have to file a report. It's your cash. You've paid taxes on it. You're doing something with it that's really no one's business, assuming it's legal, which I'm sure 99% of the time, especially in middle America, it is. If you do that a few times, the actual act of doing that is called structuring, and that's a crime. And it's not a small crime. It's up to 5 years in jail and $200,000 fine if you managed, i.e. structure your transaction to avoid a bank filing a CTR on you. So don't fall into this trap. Even if cash is completely legal, you just committed a serious crime. If the government wants to get you for something else, let's say because you trespassed or you protested in front of Planned Parenthood, they're going to come look at this and try to layer on the crime against you. So do not fall for this. Do not think you're avoiding CTRs by structuring your transaction. Just don't do it until we get this law changed. So that's all I got. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this, please like and follow. I'm going to do these PSL shows about once a week. Let me know what you liked. Let me know what you didn't like. I can adjust pretty quickly. And if you're not a customer of Old Glory Bank, what are you waiting on? It takes 8 minutes, 8 minutes, oldglorybank.com. If you like what we're doing at Old Glory Bank, and we are working hard. We have all the products and services of the big banks, but unlike the big banks, we love you. Our customer service center is in Durant, Oklahoma, not offshore. We have the best products and services: home loans, business loans, VA loans, SBA loans, debit cards, credit cards, 40,000 free ATMs. You heard about Old Glory Protect. We also have Old Glory Cash In, where you can walk into one of 88,000 locations and deposit cash. We have everything you need to bank. We have one branch in beautiful Elmore City. If you like what we're doing, think about being an owner. We have a little mini IPO going on. The minimum investment's only $63. Come join me as an owner. Come join me, Dr. Carson, Larry Elder, John Rich, Governor Fallon, and I think we're up to 5,000 owners now. Come join us. Think about it. God bless, and PSL forever.